Hey there, this is Jamie. We get a lot of questions about PTSD and sleep apnea in connection with veterans claims, so I thought today we'd take a couple minutes and go over some things you can do to make those claims a little better, give yourself a better chance to have them granted in the first place. One thing you want to know is the VA rates mental issues all on the same scale. So whether you have PTSD or depression or anxiety or any other mental disorder, they're typically going to rate those on the same scale. And so there's not a huge advantage to having multiple of those diagnoses. As long as you have one of them, you're generally going to be looking at the same rating structure. That said, the symptoms that you have are typically what will determine the rating. And common symptoms for any mental disorder could include loss of interest in doing things, various activities, sleeping problems, sometimes anger issues, obviously feeling depressed or tired. All of those things can arise as a result of mental disorders. One thing with these as well is that the symptoms may not show up right away. So even though your period of service might have been 5, 10, or more years ago, the symptoms don't necessarily occur while you're in the service. If they do, and you reported them to the service while you were in it, a lot of the times it would be much easier to get the claim granted. Of course, that's not usually how it works, and if the symptoms don't show up till years later, obviously you wouldn't be able to report them until they do. Now think about if this sounds familiar. You put in a claim for PTSD or depression, you go to an exam, later you get a rating decision and it says, well, we looked at your period of service, there was no mention of treatment in service, so the claim is denied. That is definitely not how service connection is supposed to work, yet in reality that seems to be what a lot of examiners do. A solution to that can be to give them some more information, such as a good statement from the veteran explaining how the symptoms arose. Maybe there's some treatment records. It's definitely helpful if you have a diagnosis from a treatment provider or have been going to treatment over a period of years since service for a mental disorder, or any other evidence that might arise that could support the claim. Now let's give a quick thought to sleep apnea, and then we'll try to briefly discuss how this all relates to each other. Sleep apnea can typically arise in one of two different ways. You might either have evidence that it occurred in service, so perhaps your fellow service members complained about you snoring a lot, or you were extremely tired during service. It could be possible that the sleep apnea arose during service and just either wasn't diagnosed or hadn't gotten bad enough yet that there was a treatment necessary. Or, and this is much more common, the sleep apnea would be secondary to some other condition that is discovered down the line. We've handled a fair amount of these claims, and it's been our experience VA is pretty strict with granting sleep apnea claims. It hardly ever happens the first time you ask. And the problem with this is that their examiners typically will not support either of those theories of service connection, and so then you're left with the claim being denied. Now again, if you're thinking that sleep apnea arose in service, you might give the VA evidence of snoring, tiredness, or other symptoms. A lot of times, certainly the veteran is supposed to be competent to report these symptoms, but VA seems to put a lot of weight on statements from other people that support what the veteran is saying. So if you have a friend or buddy that served with you and would be able to write a statement saying, yeah, this guy snored all the time, I couldn't get any sleep because he was so loud, something like that can go a long way to helping get the claim granted on a direct basis. Alternatively, if you have a condition such as PTSD or depression, it may be possible to link sleep apnea to that condition. A lot of the time that's going to require a medical nexus letter, although there is medical research that those same experts would rely on, that you could attempt to rely on yourself. The problem is VA frequently will not credit, if you send them some articles, I think that they will look at them, but a lot of the times that won't be dispositive of their decision. And they may still send you to an examiner who doesn't really understand the issue, and if they come back with a negative exam, then that's where you usually get a denial. Now there's a third way to look at this, and we've had a little luck with this, granting sleep apnea secondary to an obesity issue. Now you need to know that the VA doesn't treat obesity as its own disorder. So it won't be sufficient to say, well, I have sleep apnea, it's secondary to being obese. But if that obesity arose because of a service-connected condition, then you may be able to use it as sort of an intermediate step. An example of this is if you have service-connected back issues and those prevent you from being able to work out, which leads to you gaining weight, then you might be able to say, well, technically the sleep apnea is secondary to the back pain, but it's because of the weight gain. And there is a ton of research that says obesity is strongly linked with sleep apnea. So just to tie this all together, if you're a veteran, you're suffering from sleep apnea, perhaps you have a service-connected condition for PTSD or depression, you might give some thought to 3 different ways to get your sleep apnea claim granted, possibly on a direct basis if you have evidence that it arose during service, potentially secondary to the mental disorder, particularly if you either get a medical nexus letter or can find some research to submit to VA showing that link. Or a third way is based on obesity if you are in fact obese and that obesity can be tracked back to a service-connected condition.